Robert Hansen was one of the most sadistic serial killers in American history. Between the 1970s and 1980s, Robert Hansen abducted anywhere from 17 to 30 women. He would fly them in his private bush plane to a secluded hunting cabin deep in the Alaskan wilderness, a place so remote it could only be reached by boat or air. Once there, the nightmare truly began. Hansen would strip them of hope and then of their freedom, releasing them into the icy forest like animals. Robert was armed with a hunting rifle or a knife, and he would stalk them through the trees, methodically tracking them down in the frozen silence. It was a twisted game of predator and prey, and he always made sure to be the one who survived. His reign of terror finally ended when a surviving victim escaped and led police to him. Robert Hansen was arrested, and the horrors he confessed to stunned the entire world. He was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2014, at the age of 75, Robert Hansen died behind bars from natural causes, far more peacefully than the woman he hunted for sport.
For the girls that still watch reality TV shows, there was this show called The Swan back in like 2004. Those days they would come out with like some crazy unhinged shows or whatever. Like the concept of it was taking ugly women or ugly ducklings as they called them and
give a makeover.
They would give them a shit ton of plastic surgery through a 3-month span. Basically be in solitary confinement because they wouldn't be allowed to look at mirrors for the 3 months. Only have 10-minute phone calls a week from loved ones and stuff. The contestants wouldn't be allowed to say what they want in the plastic surgery. Whatever the doctors gave them, they would just have to be okay with
like a test subject.
She will receive a brow lift, mid-facelift, fat removal from under her eyes, a nose job, a corner lip lift, fat injections in her lips, and a chin lift. For her body, she will receive breast augmentation, liposuction on her abdomen and thighs, as well as her calves and ankles to feminize her legs.
Another fucked up thing was there was a girl, her name was Lori Arias, and she just went in for a tummy tuck because she had lost 150 pounds, but she ended up being the most procedures out of everybody. She got a facelift, eyebrow lift, eye lift, breast implants, butt lift, mad shit, bro. And then whenever they revealed the way she would look at the end, because they have them look at a mirror, they can see the reactions. She saw herself on the camera. She stayed composed. I think she did tear up a little bit, but then after, when she went to the back, she was screaming at the producers saying like, yo, I want my face back. Like, what the fuck did y'all do to me? And then after that,
just when you thought this situation couldn't get any worse, it does. On Monday, some of the grand jury documents were released from Epstein's Florida case. And it shows that the prosecutors in Florida knew that Epstein had assaulted minors years before. And then they cut a deal with him that basically let him walk out scot-free. Now, this is a shock because grand jury testimony is usually very secret. And it's stuff that they don't typically unseal. And this investigation took place in 2006. So this shows that authorities knew in 2006 that Epstein had been assaulting minors. And then they let him go. And it wouldn't be another 13 years until he was finally arrested again and then took his own life. All these documents just go to show that Epstein really was given a free pass. All the people in power, all the rich friends that he had, they all conspired and agreed to let Epstein run whatever ring he wanted to. And if you really study this case, you know that Epstein was connected to the government. There's no doubt in my mind. And these grand jury documents kind of prove it. I mean, how do you have someone who's accused of raping multiple minors get a sweetheart deal, where he's essentially given a slap on the wrist and shown his way out of the building? Oh yeah, if you cater to the rich and powerful, that's how you get a deal like that. The more and more we learn about Epstein, the more people are waking up, but the full truth of this whole thing will never be admitted to. But if you want to be a part of the solution, head to EpsteinJustice.com, sign their petition demanding justice for the victims of Epstein, and send a letter on their website to your member of Congress. This organization wants a body in government to investigate these sex rings and actually honestly, truthfully investigate them and give the people, the American people, the real answers that we deserve.
We moved on way too quickly from Waterworld hosting a naked party for children. This is my Roman Empire. I just can't believe that they actually did this. It was actually last time that I went to Waterworld that I googled the opening times and found these really disturbing articles about this situation. Waterworld in Stoke-on-Trent opened in 1989, and actually one of my first core memories as a child child is going here with my brother and my dad, being sat in the shallow end as somebody actually pooed in the water. This thing started bobbing towards us and we like screamed and ran out of the pool. And I feel like a member of staff just scooped it out with a paper cup and then just sent everyone back in the water again. That was it for me. I was done. At that point, I just sat on the side eating my chips and I just did not get back in the pool. In September 2020, a controversial event was advertised. British Naturism apparently booked out the venue for a family skinny dipping event. This was apparently open to both adults and children for the 26th of September. Obviously, people were immediately up in arms, but Waterworld really doubled down on this and just stuck to their guns. They hit back and they said these kind of events have been going on for 20 years up and down the country and that the event would continue as planned. They said precautions were in place, including security staff and blacked out windows. They stated, "We take our safeguarding and health and safety responsibilities very seriously and pride ourselves on offering a safe environment for all Waterworld users. This is not an event which can be attended by simply anyone walking in off the street. It's an organised private event. No children will be attending without their parents or guardians." I don't think that's the issue here, Waterworld. I don't think anybody's worried about a child attending without a parent. Now, obviously, people continued booting off about this event, continued to complain about it, and there was uproar, to be honest. Protesters even gathered outside of the water park ahead of the event, and ultimately, Waterworld eventually had no choice but to cancel it. They eventually had to change the policy for any future naturist bookings to be 18 plus.
If you think nothing will truly disturb you or keep you up at night, I dare you to look up how many people have gone missing from Nome, Alaska. Because from 1960 to 2004 alone, 24 people disappeared from this remote, isolated town, and it is terrifying. That's what happened to Joseph Balderas and Florence Okpialuk, who disappeared within 4 years of each other in Nome. Residents in the town are on edge because of these mysterious disappearances that just keep happening, and the majority of them are still unsolved, so let's talk about it. This disturbing reality was brought to my awareness after listening to the Up and Vanish podcast, where the host, Payne Lindsay, actually traveled to Nome to investigate the disappearances of Joseph and Florence. Their new season sheds light on how both of them seemingly vanished into thin air. Let's start with Joseph. Joseph moved to Nome in 2014 and quickly fell in love with the little town. He was a law clerk with Nome's 2nd District Court. He was described as incredibly smart, kind, and was good at pretty much everything he did. He was about to move to Juneau with his fiancée, and overall life just seemed really great for them. That is until June of 2016. Joseph was last seen on June 24th, 2016, but he very mysteriously disappeared after this, and what followed has never been explained. 3 days came and went with no sign of Joseph. His fiancée wasn't able to get a hold of him, and he no-called, no-showed work, which was extremely out of character for him. So one of his colleagues reported him missing, and a massive search was launched. That very same day, police found his abandoned truck at mile 44 of the Nome Council Highway. It was unlocked, and inside was his backpack that contained fishing supplies, waders, and boots, but Joseph was nowhere to be found. Police assumed that he was just in the area hiking or running, but it would soon be clear that something horrible happened to him. Police, along with search and rescue and the U.S. Coast Guard, scoured the area for Joseph, but found nothing, and it was like he vanished into thin air. The search for Joseph was called off after just 9 days after finding no evidence of what happened to him. Police are not ruling out foul play, and there are some theories as to what could have happened, but to this day, Joseph and the truth remain missing. It didn't take long for tragedy to strike Nome again, because just 4 years later, another person would go missing under mysterious circumstances. Florence Okpialuk was 33 years old when she disappeared from Nome on August 31st, 2020. Florence was a native of Wales, Alaska, but had moved to Nome in 2013. Similar to Joseph, she was last seen leaving a tent on West Beach at around 4 p.m. that day, and after this, she vanished into thin air. A massive search for her was conducted as well, which involved Nome police, the FBI, and the U.S. Coast Guard, but the only thing ever found was Florence's shoes, socks, and jacket. And just like Joseph, to this day, Florence remains missing. So I heard about this disturbing mystery after listening to the podcast Up and Vanish. I don't know if any of you listen to this podcast, but the host, Payne Lindsay, is so incredibly talented. This isn't just a typical true crime podcast, because Payne and his team have spent years working together and traveling to different places like Nome to get on-the-ground coverage, which is pretty rare for a podcast. podcast. He is extremely hands-on, and his approach is boots-on-the-ground investigative journalism, which I love. His new season already has 2 parts that are up and ready to listen to, and I highly suggest you all go listen to this. It's insane what he's able to uncover by simply going to these places and investigating, especially since these cases have stalled. So he's really picking up where the police have left off, directly working with the victims' families to get justice for their loved ones. You can listen to Up and Vanished on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but I'm curious to know what you guys think is really happening in Nome, Alaska.
In 2001, Texas became the setting of one of the most hauntingly cruel crimes imaginable. 25-year-old Shantae Millard, high and intoxicated, was speeding down the road when she plowed into a homeless man named Gregory Biggs. The impact was horrific. It shattered her windshield and lodged Gregory halfway through the glass, his mangled body twisted and broken. But somehow, he was still alive, barely. His legs dangled outside the car, his head was bleeding, and he was conscious, gasping, moaning, begging for help. But Shantae didn't call 911. She drove home, parked her car in the garage, shut the door, and left him there. Gregory lay trapped in the shattered windshield, bleeding out onto her dashboard, suffering in agony for nearly 2 days. He cried out as his life slowly slipped away, just feet from where Shantae slept. When he finally died, alone and unheard, she tried to cover it up. She burned the car, lied, and placed Gregory's body in a park. But the truth bled through the cracks. Shantae Millard was eventually convicted of murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. But no sentence could ever match the slow, silent horror Gregory endured. A man who was treated like roadkill, left to die in the dark.
He stalked this little girl and snatched her from her tent while she was on a camping trip with her parents. I cannot imagine what it must have felt like for those parents to wake up in the morning and realise their child had been abducted. It was the 16th of October 2021. Sweet little 4-year-old Cleo Smith was on a family camping trip with her parents in remote Western Australia at Blowhole's camping ground. They'd had a great first night camping. They'd arrived on the Friday evening. The family was loving being together in nature. The mum, the stepdad, Cleo, and her baby sister Isla. Cleo and her sister were put to bed by their parents as normal that evening, and they could never have predicted the nightmare they were about to enter. At around 1 a.m, Cleo woke up wanting a drink, and her mum got up and sorted that for her and then went back to bed. But at 6 a.m, when her parents woke up, their world was completely turned upside down. Cleo and her sleeping bag were nowhere to be seen. Now, her parents knew immediately she couldn't have just woken up and gone off of her own accord, because due to how high the tent zip was, there was no way the little girl would have even been able to reach the zip. A huge search began instantly, and time was really of the essence. The police knew they needed to act fast. They were scouring the area, trying to find the child on the off chance that she'd been taken and then maybe been abandoned. The news hit headlines all across the world, and people were literally holding their breath, praying this girl would be found alive and well. Thousands of posters were plastered all over the local news, and a $1 million reward was offered. Cleo's mum and stepdad appeared on the news pleading for any information and for their daughter to be returned home. I remember watching this as it unfolded. It was pretty sickening, to be honest. Comments on TikTok videos were like saying they were guilty, saying that the mum seemed too numb, saying that they were acting really weird and that it was like Madeleine McCann all over again and the parents were to blame. This is honestly why social media can be so damaging, because imagine those parents seeing those comments on that video when your child has literally been abducted. Police decided to check the whereabouts of registered S offenders in the area, which turned out to be around 20. They'd also cleverly traced a mobile number to a phone tower near the campsite at around the time of the abduction, and they identified the owner of this phone to be 36-year-old Terrence Darrell Kelly. They arrested him. They had reason to believe he was involved, and just hours later they showed up to his housing duplex in Carnarvon. After an agonising 18-day hunt, like I said, where the parents were vilified, they burst into the apartment and found the little girl playing with toys on her own on the bedroom floor. Disturbingly, this kidnapper had been following Cleo's mum on social media and watching her via several weird accounts. It turned out he was obsessed with Bratz dolls and had hundreds in his home. The night Cleo was snatched, he apparently had seen her bike outside the tent and realised she was in there. He decided to unzip the tent and take his opportunity to strike. He was found to have severe and complex personality disorder and had injected substances prior to the abduction. He admitted smacking this poor girl and trying to tie her up and restrain her, but he couldn't because he said she was a bit of a fighter. The poor child had been through hell, kept captive in this stranger's home, but thankfully the nightmare was over. She was reunited with her family and her kidnapper was given just 13 years in prison.
This pedophile has been connected to multiple serial killers and was the ringleader of one of the biggest pedophile rings in American history. Now, that's a loaded statement, but I do want to warn you, viewer discretion is advised going forward. So this is John David Norman. He was born in 1927, and between 1960 and 1998, he was convicted multiple times on charges of assaulting children and producing CP. But John David Norman wasn't your average pedophile. He was a businessman. And in fact, he started up and operated multiple CP production and distribution rings across the US. These rings included the Odyssey Foundation based in Dallas, which mailed CP to consumers, the Delta Project, which did the same thing in Illinois, Handy Andy from Pennsylvania. I mean, the list goes on and on. This guy was the sickest type of individual. Throughout his life, John David Norman went by at least 20 different aliases. But here's where things get disturbing. So John David Norman was arrested by the police multiple times on CP production and distribution charges, and on charges related to him assaulting kids. And when he was arrested, he was found in possession of a Rolodex, which was basically a storage container for index cards. And each of these Rolodexes had 30,000 cards in them, with the names of at least 50 to 100,000 clients in the US. These clients of his included politicians, famous musicians, celebrities, and everyday people from everyday communities. But every single time after John David Norman was arrested and the police gained access to this Rolodex, it went missing. This not only happened once, but it happened multiple times. So obviously authorities were in on this whole operation and they were helping him keep it going. I mean, how do you lose track multiple times of an object that could give you leads on 50 to 100,000 pedophiles? Well, you lose track of it if there are people on there that you don't want investigated. But here's where things get disturbing. John David Norman has been linked to a number of famous serial killers, one of them being Dean Corll, the Candyman in Houston, Texas, who victimized, tortured, and murdered at least 30 young boys. He has been directly tied to John David Norman through the Odyssey Foundation, and obviously there is a darker connection there that we can explore in another TikTok. But one of John David Norman's employees was a guy named Philip Paskey. While John David Norman was in prison in Illinois, Philip Paskey helped him run his CP operation from behind prison bars. But eventually, Philip Paskey got out of prison, and guess who he started working for? That's right, John Wayne Gacy. That's right, Philip Paskey worked for John Wayne Gacy. Philip Paskey was one of the boys who helped Gacy all the time. He was in the crawl space. And if you don't know, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young boys. Now, I obviously don't think John Wayne Gacy worked alone. There's actually data that shows that he was out of town at certain times during the murder spree, and the same can be said about Dean Corll. I mean, there are a lot of inconsistencies in these stories. But time and time again, John David Norman was allowed to go free. They would let him out on parole, then he would escape, he would start up another CP ring, he'd be arrested, he'd be let out on parole, he'd escape again. But he was eventually arrested and put into prison in California in 1998. But they just couldn't keep him there, and eventually they released him to a rural town. He was on parole, and he then violated the terms of his parole by giving a note to a 19-year-old grocery store bagger, giving him his contact information. He was then ordered back into state custody in 2009, and he died in 2011, thus taking all of his horrific secrets with him to the grave. Now, there is so much more to this story that I couldn't even begin to cover in one TikTok, so if you guys want me to dive deeper into this, I totally can. Let me know in the comments. This is a subject that has fascinated me for years, and this is something that nobody really knows about or talks about. We recently investigated a ring just like this being run in Michigan, and I produced an entire documentary about it. So if you want to help me spread awareness about these sorts of things and how they've happened and continue to happen, definitely go check out this documentary on YouTube. It got demonetized, but I'm not trying to make money off of this. I'm trying to spread awareness so it doesn't matter to me. I just want people to see this information and learn it so they can understand that these things have happened and continue to happen.
Every once in a while, you'll hear of a story that is not only incredibly disturbing, but at the same time will make you lose sleep and rack your brain over what really happened. That's this one for me, because picture this. She was found dead in her own basement, covered in blood. There was evidence of a violent struggle, such as a broken piggy bank embedded in her forehead. Police assume that she just fell down the stairs and died, but at some point after her fall, fall, she stood up and left bloody footprints at the base of the stairs. Except for some reason, she never climbed back up for help. The broken piggy bank was found sitting perfectly on a shelf at the top of the stairs, and this is just the beginning. Police say no foul play was involved, but I am not totally buying it. This is one of those cases that fill me with dread because no one knows what she experienced in her final moments. But I cannot stop thinking about it, so let's talk about the mysterious death of Amanda and Tony. Amanda was 31 years old when she suddenly and very mysteriously died on October 24th, 2015. She and her husband Lee lived in a nice little house in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, in the Castle Ridge neighborhood. Living with them was their rescue dog Ruby and their 2 cats, who they loved so much. Amanda and Lee married in 2009 and were pretty much inseparable ever since. They rarely ever spent time apart, but the rare exception was that fateful weekend. The weekend of October 23rd, 2015 marked the anniversary of Lee's dad's death, so he and Amanda had planned to drive up to his mom's house in Saskatchewan so that she wasn't alone. But on that Friday, when they were due to leave, Amanda changed her mind last minute and decided to stay home instead. She was known to suffer from really bad migraines, and she had one that day, so she didn't want to drive the 8 hours to her mother-in-law's house. So off Lee went by himself, and little did he know that when he came back home, his life would never be the same. After leaving, Lee and Amanda spent Friday night and most of Saturday texting back and forth like normal. At around 7 p.m. on Saturday, Lee called her, and this is when she told him that her migraine had pretty much gone away and she was feeling much better, which was great to hear. But not long into the call, Lee heard their dog start barking and yelping, in which Amanda tried to calm her down. Then Lee heard a loud crunching sound before the phone abruptly cut out. He tried to call her back a few times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. He also tried texting her a handful of times, but after this, he never got a response back. Even though the couple were really close, Lee didn't seem too concerned about this at first and just figured Amanda was either busy or maybe her phone stopped working. But when Sunday evening came and went and he still hadn't heard from her, he decided to cut the trip a little bit short and head home first thing Monday morning. And no one could have expected what he was about to find. When he got home that Monday afternoon, which was now October 26, 2015, he walked into a chaotic scene. The dog and cats were running about with no food or water, and there was poop and pee all over the place. He let the dog out and started looking for Amanda, but at first he couldn't find her. Nothing seemed out of place except for an overturned dining room chair, but then he made his way to the basement, the only part of the house that he hadn't looked yet. When he turned on the lights, he immediately saw a gruesome scene. At the bottom of the stairs, the concrete basement floor was covered in blood, and when he made his way down there, he found Amanda laying on the basement floor, also covered in blood. Lee then called 911 and told them that Amanda was cold to the touch. When Calgary police arrived, they found a violent scene. They noticed a significant amount of blood, and the scene was described as gruesome, and by far the bloodiest they had ever walked into. Upon looking at her, investigators' first impression was that it appeared she'd been struck in the head by something that caused a major injury to the right side of her face, so they thought for sure this was a homicide case and treated it as such. Authorities then noticed a broken piggy bank sitting perfectly on a shelf at the top of the stairs, and when they took a closer look at Amanda's body, they then found pieces of it embedded into her forehead, and little pieces of it surrounding her body. Like I said, this was a really gruesome scene, but this is where things start to get strange. So Amanda was laying in a pool of her own blood, but what's odd is that investigators found weird swipes and patterns in the blood, and then additional drops of blood were found on top of the blood that had already been smeared across the floor, meaning this either came from Amanda after some of it had already started to dry, or it came from someone else. But the most disturbing thing is that authorities found evidence that Amanda stood up at some point after her fall. Her own bloody footprints were found pointing forward at the base of the stairs, yet she didn't climb them for help. She was alive at this point, so why she didn't do this? No one knows. A lot of the blood evidence found in the basement suggests that she spent a lot of time there moving around before she died, which is extremely disturbing and confusing. There were a set of mirrors on a wall in the basement, and this is where the majority of the blood pooled under them. This area also contained bits of the broken piggy bank. Investigators came up with 2 reasons as to why that could be. One being that after she was injured, either accidentally or if someone attacked her, she went to the mirrors to examine her injuries. Another reason could be that with the light hitting the mirrors, maybe she thought that that was the way up the stairs and was confused and disoriented. Investigators also found a bloody handprint on the wall at the bottom of the staircase, and it was possible that she was trying to hold herself up there. There were lots of little blood spatters on the wall, and authorities believe this was likely from her shaking her bloodied hair to get it out of her face after her injury. But most damning of all is that authorities found bloody drag marks, indicating that her body had been moved from one spot in the basement to another, where she was eventually found. After examining her body and the whole scene in the basement, it seemed clear that Amanda was murdered, but then her autopsy came back, which really only raised more questions. It was concluded that blunt force trauma caused Amanda to bleed to death, and she was covered in bruises and had a broken right orbital bone. A toxicology also showed WEED in her system, but this also confirmed that only her DNA was found at the scene, no one else's. So this led police to comb through her phone records, which showed that the last time anyone heard from her was when her husband called her at 7 p.m. on Saturday. They then determined that her time of death was around this time. But what's odd is that a neighbor came forward and said that on the night Amanda died, around the same time that she was on the phone with Lee, she heard a loud bang coming from the house, and then someone yelling. Another neighbor said that around the same time, they saw someone running away from the area through someone's backyard. This wasn't the safest neighborhood, but police found no sign of forced entry, and only her DNA was found at the scene. If there was an intruder, they would have had to enter the house either using a key or go through the back door, which Lee couldn't remember if it was locked or not when he got home. So then authorities started wondering if this was maybe just a tragic accident rather than a homicide. Like I said, they found no evidence of a break-in, nothing was missing, and the only thing that seemed out of the ordinary was the broken piggy bank and the overturned dining room chair. It was thought that maybe due to smoking WEED, Amanda was paranoid and could have knocked over the chair, and maybe just accidentally fell down the stairs. Maybe after falling, she suffered a concussion. People with a concussion often do little actions to try and soothe themselves, subconsciously. It was possible that the swoosh and smear marks in the blood came from Amanda herself, maybe moving her head side to side to try and soothe herself. One thing that investigators couldn't really explain, though, was the fact that her dog and both of her cats had not come down to the basement once after she fell. There were no paw prints in the blood, and it seemed unusual that for 48 hours they never once went downstairs to check on their owner, who they loved. Police assumed that since the floor was concrete, it was incredibly slippery, coated in blood, and because Amanda was barefoot, they thought she likely just kept slipping on her own blood and repeatedly hitting her head on the ground. But after 14 months of investigating, Calgary police ruled Amanda's death as accidental, stating that she just accidentally fell down the stairs and died, that no foul play was involved, despite the gruesome scene and the handful of unanswered questions, like how the piggy bank had been broken and pieces of it embedded into her forehead, yet somehow it wasn't knocked off the shelf at the top of the stairs, or how Amanda was alive for some time in the basement after her injuries, moving around, and even stood and faced the stairs, yet she never tried climbing them for help. Her phone was found to be thrown across the room, broken, which is another odd factor to this case. So although we don't know what exactly happened to Amanda, there are a few theories. Theory number one is that she did just accidentally fall. Maybe she was disoriented from her migraine that day and distracted on the phone with Lee and fell. Or maybe she tripped and fell over her dog since she was barking and Amanda was trying to get her to be quiet. It could be possible that she fell on the piggy bank and tripped down the stairs. Then she lost a lot of blood and succumbed to her injuries. It is weird though that the piggy bank wasn't knocked off the shelf. Theory number two was that Lee was involved. They did have a really loving relationship, but he was known to have a little temper. This was quickly ruled out though because he was in a different province with his mom at the time of her death, and this was confirmed. And he also fully cooperated with authorities. And theory number three is that Amanda was killed by an intruder. Like I said, this wasn't the safest neighborhood, and they did have reports of people breaking into their backyard in the past, but police found no evidence of this. But the smears in the blood on the basement floor could have been from an intruder trying to wipe away their footprints. It was also reported that a bloody towel was found in the basement, but whether or not that was from Amanda in an attempt to clean herself up or from someone else, no one knows. To me, it seems like a confrontation could have happened, especially with her injuries. Even the investigator said that this didn't seem like a normal scene or a regular fall down the stairs with how gruesome it was. It seems incredibly unlikely to have a fatal fall like this in your own home. And although it's rare, I guess it can happen. But the question is, did it? This case fills me with dread in ways I cannot even describe. I just don't get how something like this can happen, leaving behind so many unanswered questions. But it's now been 10 years, and whatever happened to Amanda in her basement that night remains a mystery.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Dr. Death, which is based on a true story, has finally returned with season 2, but I still have so many questions. Dr. Paolo Macchiarini created what many people didn't think was possible and gave people another chance at life. Well, at least that's what they thought. Dr. Paolo's charm stopped many people from seeing his manipulation and lies. His professionalism was also questioned when he began a relationship with a journalist who also believed everything he told her. But it wasn't long until she began noticing the lies in Dr. Paolo's personal and professional life. What I love about Dr. Death is that each season focuses on a different doctor, their patients, and the horrific things that they went through. Season 1 was great, but season 2 returns with an intense new story, and you can watch the full season starring Mandy Moore and Edgar Ramirez on December 21st on Peacock.
My boyfriend of 17 years burned me alive because I was pregnant with his child. My name is Shaina, and around the age of 17 I fell in love with a boy called Driss. Despite our religion, we braved the forbidden without telling our families, and we did it without any protection, so naturally I got pregnant. I told my boyfriend and thought he would be happy to hear the news, but I was far from reality. When I told him, he was furious and refused to admit the mistakes we'd made together, wanting to be above reproach in the eyes of his family. So he arranged to meet me in a little shack next to our house, douse me in petrol, and light a fire. He was soon arrested for what he had done, but at the time of the offense he was a minor, but when he was tried he was over 18, which is why he was tried as a minor, and sentenced to 18 years in prison. The worst part of it all is that, on the day of sentencing, the judge and the lawyers said, word for word, I smoked her. Do you think this sentence is fair?
My new boyfriend didn't want children, but I had 3, so I killed them all. My name is Diane Downs. Unfortunately, things weren't going well with my former husband, so we divorced, and I was sadly a single mother with 3 children. Following this very difficult breakup for me, I took out my frustrations on my children, leading to their psychological abuse. One day I fell in love with Robert, but he was very clear he did not want children. So one day, I took the car and put my 3 children inside, then drove until I stopped, got out with a pistol, and shot each of them. Then I sped to the hospital, explaining that a robber had tried to steal our car and had shot at Oos. And to make it all more believable, I shot myself in the arm. Unfortunately, many people witnessed the scene, and I was quickly arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment. After trying to kill my 3 children to win Robert's heart, in the end, I'll have nothing and will finish my days in prison. What do you think about that?
These are pictures that completely fooled the world. Up first is this picture, and I know everybody remembers this photo. When this photo went viral, about 50% of people could see the cigar, and the other 50% had no idea it was there. The cigar is 100% sticking out of the wall, and if you can't see it, then I don't know. Next up is the behind the scenes photo of the MGM intro with the legendary lion, and many people couldn't believe this is actually how they did it. And many people thought it was animal abuse. But luckily, it was just a normal photo of a lion at the vet that got photoshopped to look like the MGM lion. Next up is a picture of a man who is playing with his baby, but his head and shoulder is making it look like his butt is facing his baby's face. This photo had the whole world confused, and no wonder why it broke the internet. Finally is a picture of a man who was on top of the Twin Towers when the first plane hit. This photo blew everybody's mind, and everyone thought, how did this man survive? But to everybody's surprise, the photo turned out to be photoshopped and it's not real at all. This is what would happen if money suddenly disappeared. Up first, everybody would start to notice all the money in their checkings and savings accounts suddenly disappeared. This would then cause every single person to wonder where their money went, which would lead to complete confusion and worry. Next up, the stock market would then crash, which would then result in the entire world panicking. People would lose millions, even billions on investments in seconds. And not long after that, mostly every single human would start to lose their minds. They would start breaking things and screaming, which might result in heart attacks for some people, and even worse, people might take their own life. Next up, every single person will then stop showing up to work because they're not getting paid for it. Even police officers, which would result in an unimaginable amount of crime. Riots would start and everything would begin to get looted. the whole system will then completely crumble, and even the government will collapse. I know some people have said the world would be better if money disappeared, but after watching this video and you thought that, do you still want money disappearing? Because realistically, it wouldn't be good for anybody if money disappeared.
On TikTok, we were the happy, innocent mother and daughter. And you'll never imagine what happened. My name is Mahek Bukhari, and I used to post videos about makeup and my life. My mother, Anne Esrin, appeared in my videos, but my mother was hiding a dark secret. She had been cheating on my father for 3 years with a 21-year-old man, Saqib Hussain. However, my mother decided to end the relationship, but Saqib wouldn't accept it. He had spent too much money on my mother. He manipulated her and said he would send intimate photos of her to my father and brother. She told me about it, and I was furious. So we came up with a plan. I told Saqib to give us the photos in exchange for $3,000. A few days later, we met in a parking lot. Saqib came with his cousin, but when they arrived, they saw 2 cars waiting for them, so they took off. We started chasing them, and they called the police. But before they could say anything, we caught up with them and ran them over. They died instantly, and we took off. The police tracked us down with the surveillance cameras, and I was sentenced to 31 years in prison, and my mother to 26.
Killed my ex-boyfriend because he had replaced me. My name is Jode Arias, and I'm a 28-year-old American woman at the time. 2 years earlier, I met Travis Alexander in 2006 at a work conference. We quickly had a special connection, and soon after, we started dating. We had a long-distance relationship, but after only 2 months, I moved to Arizona to be with him. Despite all this, after 1 year of relationship, we broke up, as we often argued because he was religious and couldn't have a relationship until marriage. But I thought it was just an excuse for him to get away from me. We remained good friends, and even planned to go on a business trip to Cancun together. But everything changed when Travis told me he was going away with another girl he'd met. That's when I lost it. I went to his house in a totally normal way, and we took intimate pictures in the shower. Then I shot him in the head. Then I stabbed her 27 times and took photos of her corpse. I threw the camera away and left. At first I denied everything, but after numerous interrogations and testimonies against me, I finally confessed to killing her in self-defense. Despite this, I was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2013.
I'm the most controversial footballer in the world. My name is Mason Greenwood, and let me tell you how my football career took a terrible turn. I emerged as one of the most promising talents in my generation. In 2019, I marked my debut with the Manchester United first team, and my dynamic displays swiftly solidified my position as one of the club's most promising prospects. Due to my many goals and assists, I quickly became a key player for United, and I was destined for the top. I received recognition from the biggest football stars, and then secured substantial contracts with major sponsors. However, my career took a terrible turn when in January 2022, I was suddenly accused of raping and assaulting my girlfriend. On social media, my girlfriend came forward with possible evidence of the abuse and rape, such as photos and audio recordings. Swiftly, my club suspended me, and significant sponsors terminated their contracts. I was apprehended by the police and compelled to address the allegations in court. While waiting for the verdict, I spent almost 2 years behind bars. My career seemed to be over. However, in 2023, all accusations against me were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Surprisingly, I reconciled with my ex, much to everyone's astonishment. Although my career seemed over, I'm now able to resume it. Do you think I should be allowed to play football again?
It's believed that this man died after hiding in toilet pipes to spy on schoolgirls. It was 1989 in the small village of Miyakoji in Japan. What would happen at a school that year would haunt pupils forever. It was the 28th of February and school teacher Yumi Tanaka was about to make a terrifying discovery. At around 5 p.m. that day, just before heading home, she popped to the toilet. When she entered the cubicle, she noticed something that she had never seen before. In the toilet bowl was a black shoe. Now, the way that the toilets worked back then was that the individual toilets were connected to a small sewer tank. Confused about where the shoe had come from, she actually went to investigate and peep into the sewer tank. What she found scarred her for life. Inside the tank was a pair of human feet. Upon the discovery, she screamed and her colleagues came to help her. Police turned up and found that the feet were actually connected to a full body in the tank. They tried to remove the human from the pipe, but it was incredibly hard. The fire service and a crane had to come and assist, and eventually the body was pulled out. The person inside was a deceased male. He was obviously at this point covered in feces, and his cause of death was found to be hypothermia. The man was identified finally as 26-year-old Naoyuki Kano. It was determined that he had been deceased for a couple of days, and it seemed like he'd voluntarily got into the toilet pipes. They concluded that he had squeezed himself in a likely attempt to peer up and spy on women using the toilet.
This is the Russian Laith incident, one of the worst things ever recorded explained. The video that I'm about to explain to you has left many people traumatized, so whatever you do, don't go looking for it. The video is pretty short, coming in at 52 seconds in length, and it's not known where in Russia this took place. And it's a mystery to how this footage made its way onto the internet. As you play the video, you see a man walk towards the lathe machine, which he assumes is off. The man is wearing baggy clothes and some kind of jacket, and wearing loose clothing around a lathe machine is a no-no, since it can be sucked up into the machine, as this man found out. After the man approaches the machine, he seems to reach over it, but the rotating pole seems to get stuck on one of his sleeves, and it then drags the man into the machine. Initially, it doesn't kill the man, instead it traps his arm around the rotating pole and the machine appears to have stopped. But after a couple seconds, the machine seems to start again, and this time dragging the poor man's entire body into the machine, rotating it around and around and around. As his limbs hit the ground after each rotation, you see red mist appear, and after a few more seconds, chunks of flesh and body parts start to fly off the machine. A man then walks into the shot and he sees what's happening to his coworker. And with a look of shock, he quickly turns off the machine, but it was too late. His coworker's body has been completely torn apart into multiple pieces, and the machine is a bloody mess. There are a collection of still images from the aftermath of the incident which shows how unrecognizable the man's body is. In one photo, you see what appears to be a tibia with no flesh around it lying on the ground. And in another photo, you see the victim's severed and crushed head underneath the machine. It's absolutely disturbing and awful to look at. This video is hard to explain and hard to watch. It's extremely gruesome and disturbing, and I really don't recommend looking for it. These are the worst deaths imaginable, and this one might be the worst one yet. Okay, so watch this jaw crusher machine absolutely destroy these rocks. But now imagine a human being being stuck in there. Well, that's what happened to this man, and I'm about to explain it all. So this man was working on one of the large jaw crushers, when suddenly the machine got jammed. The man then went into the machine trying to fix it while it was still running. And he is attempting to unjam it, and he must succeed because he gets sucked right into it. Then you see the big rock on your screen right now hit him in the back and pushes him down further into it. And you then see the man try and hold on to anything he could. And in the video, which you can find online, you see the man vibrating extremely fast. So this man is slowly being dragged into these metal jaws, and also being hit by all the boulders and rocks falling down on him. And then he is suddenly just gone, like he never existed. This is a machine that turns boulders into dust, so can you just imagine what it did to him? This man had to go through absolute hell because he was alive for a good portion of it. You can tell he was by just watching the video. This man literally got crushed from his toes up in a very slow fashion, all while being crushed and pushed by other boulders that are about to be crushed. There was no way he could have gotten out, and there was no reason for him to honestly be in there. I get that he was just trying to fix the machine, but why would you go into it when it's still on? I don't know, I feel like this whole thing could have been avoided, but in this situation, it wasn't. All you can hope for is that this man went into shock and really didn't feel anything. But I don't think that's the case. This was a very slow and painful death, and I think he felt every second of it. Please don't watch the video because it's absolutely disturbing and hard to watch. And I now have a fear of these jaw crusher machines. This is just completely awful, and I feel so bad for this man and his family.
This tattoo led to the arrest of an infamous child predator. So it's January of 2013 and United States authorities released this wanted poster, along with this wanted poster. Now, in each of these posters that I'm showing you, the FBI released cropped images from CP that they had recovered. Very infamous CP images and videos that had circled the dark web for decades. Now, they were never able to identify the man and the woman in the photos up until this point, but they had been able to track these tattoos that were on the woman's body. And like I said before, they had released images like this, still images from these videos that they had recovered. Sick, disturbing videos. These images were absolutely disturbing and they had shaken agents to the core. And by releasing the photos and images of the adults that took place in the abuse to the internet, they hoped that somebody would come forward and show exactly who these creeps and criminals were. Well, those tattoos proved to be this woman's downfall. And less than a day later, Laith Mae Montemayor was arrested. She had been identified as the woman who was seen abusing an underage girl in these decades-old photos and materials. And even though she thought she had escaped justice, you can't run from the law forever. Now, after this first initial arrest, the police were hopeful that someone would come forward and help to identify the other man who was seen in these images abusing children. Well, less than 24 hours later, they would. And that's when 43-year-old Lance Robert Fries from Arizona was taken into custody. This was the man they had been searching for that had helped produce these disturbing images. Now, eventually Lance would be sentenced to over 24 years in prison, and Laith Mae would also be sentenced to a similar term, but I couldn't find any information about this third suspect that they had released images of. So, if you know this guy, if you've ever seen a guy like this, please try to find him, please report him to the police because he was just as big of a part of these images and videos as the other two. And I can't find any information on whether or not they were able to actually catch him. And you always have to be on the lookout for creeps and people like this because they look like the most normal, unassuming folks, but deep down they can be hiding some of the darkest, decades-old secrets that you could possibly imagine. Never visit this abandoned building in New Orleans. Here's why. This is a historic photo of the Hope Haven Orphanage and Madonna Manor in New Orleans, Louisiana. This place was a Catholic school that for decades took in the orphans of New Orleans and surrounding areas and provided them with a loving and caring home. At least that's what people thought. In recent years, though, in reality, we've been finding out that Hope Haven was a house of horrors for kids that were sent there. As it turns out, the priests and nuns that were working these buildings were essaying the children there. They were not only abusing these children in vile ways, but they were also physically abusing them, beating them with rulers, beating them with sticks. And like I said, forcing them into performing horrific acts on them. These were nuns, priests, monks, people that were tasked with giving these children a nice home. And a lot of these men were abusing the young boys when no one was looking. All you have to do is go read this article about the former orphanage. I mean, it talks about how children would hear other kids screaming through the hallways throughout all the night. Kids would see other children with bruised and bloody faces. And it details firsthand accounts of kids that were inappropriately touched when they were there living there. Now, it's no wonder that Hope Haven and Madonna Manor are both known to be extremely haunted. And a few years ago, I actually broke in there with my wife and a couple other people from New Orleans that knew the area well. And the energy inside of those buildings is absolutely indescribable. It was some of the most haunting, some of the saddest energy I think we all have ever felt. It was almost like stepping back in time, walking those hallways. I mean, a lot of the stuff that was in there was just left when the buildings were finally closed down. And in one of the hallways, there was a massive painting of a group of clowns that was just staring at us from the darkness. That's in my video. If you want to watch it, it's on my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files. Yeah, it's just absolutely horrific, the things that happened there. And some of the responses that we got when we were asking the questions led us to believe that some of those kids, those victims, may be still there inside of the buildings. We also received some responses that led us to believe that there may be some of the evil priests still living there. I don't really know exactly what the type of energy is that's in those buildings, but it's just not good.
Two sisters were killed just days apart in two separate tragedies. Karen Garcia was a 21-year-old mother from California. She had a 2-year-old child with her ex, Salvador Garcia Jr., who she had been with previously for 9 years. On the 7th of January 2018, Karen's sister Jessica was tragically killed in a car accident. Jessica was only 19 years old when she had been travelling from a Denny's near her home. 4 of her friends were also killed with her in the car. When Karen vanished 2 days later, family felt it may have been related to her sister's death. They wondered if she was just really struggling mentally and needed some time to be on her own. However, her already grieving family were dealt another horrifying blow when police started searching Karen's home. She was reported missing and police had to tell the family that they had reason to believe that she had been killed. Police immediately had a suspect, and it was her ex, Salvador. Word actually got out that police were hunting for him and he went on the run. Salvador's neighbour reportedly saw Karen on the 8th of January when she'd been collecting her things. She'd been in the process of moving things out of that apartment and the neighbour never saw her again. The following day, the neighbour said that he went inside of the apartment and saw a big red stain. There was also blood spatter on the walls and drawers, so he rang police. Investigators also discovered drag marks at the property, indicating that a victim had been removed from the house. Tragically, Karen's body was discovered in her own car in a car park in Colusa. She was, quote, in the driver's seat of her car in a reclining position with her face down and obscured by her hair. She was covered with a sweater and had her charging cell phone perched on one hip to appear as if she was napping. The autopsy showed that she died from blunt force trauma to her head. Police were working on a theory that Salvador may have killed Karen because he couldn't accept their breakup. Frustratingly, due to him being on the run, it would take over a year for police to track him down in Mexico. In August 2019, they managed to arrest him and he was transferred back to California. There, he was charged with Karen's murder. In court, texts were revealed between the pair that showed that Karen had broke up with him. He was refusing to accept the fact that things were over. In 2020, he pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and got 25 years in prison.
The allegations against former Drake and Josh star Drake Bell are disturbing. And they aren't just allegations, he actually pled guilty to a felony charge, so let's take a look. So if you don't know who Drake Bell is, he's a former child star who was huge on Nickelodeon in the 2000s. He first was seen on The Amanda Show with Amanda Bynes, and then rose to the mega stardom category when he was in the show Drake and Josh with Josh Peck. Now, Drake Bell's first brush with the legal system came when he was arrested for a DUI. And this was kind of a massive moment in the media because it showed that Drake Bell was now an adult. He wasn't the beloved child star, and he was subject to real legal action if he messed up. But the Drake Bell story took a grim and disturbing turn when in 2021 he was arrested on some scary charges. He was arrested on child endangerment charges and disseminating material harmful to juveniles charges. So, according to authorities, Drake Bell had sent a 15-year-old girl inappropriate messages over social media in the months leading up to a concert that he was performing. And then, according to the authorities, at the concert, he endangered the child in some way. Now, keep in mind that at the time, Drake Bell was in his 30s and this girl was 15 years old. And disturbingly, just a month after he was arrested and these charges were filed, Drake Bell's accuser made a public appearance and stated that he had SA'd her. Keep in mind, this assault took place when the girl was underage. But shockingly, Drake Bell actually pled guilty to the initial charges before the girl came forward and said that he had assaulted her. So he didn't try to deny that he had been messaging this minor, he just said that it had happened, and after he admitted guilt, he was given 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. Now, as if all of this isn't disturbing enough, a child star that went on to exhibit some form of pedophilic behavior, multiple ex-girlfriends of Drake Bell's actually came out and said that during their relationships he had been abusive physically and mentally. And one girl who's a TikToker actually claimed that they had started dating when she was 16 and he was obviously way older than her. Something strange I want to add about Drake Bell is that he started making music randomly in Spanish in the year 2019 and even changed his name on Twitter to the name Drake Campaña. He even tweeted in 2019 that his social networks will be only in Spanish from now on and no English. I still couldn't find any real reasoning behind why he made this change, but I thought it's interesting that this was right before all of the allegations against him started to come out.
The girl went missing just hours after taking this selfie. It was June the 6th, 2014 in New York. That evening, 21-year-old Sarah Good was due to go to a party. She was the youngest of 9 siblings and had a big family. She was also the mother to a 4-year-old daughter, and one of her family members had offered to babysit for the evening. It was the first time she'd gone out in a long time, so she was very excited. She posed for this picture before heading to Medford to meet her friends. She had told her family that it was likely to be a late one, so they weren't initially too worried when she didn't return home. They figured that she might have just been letting her hair down and she would return home soon. However, the following day was her nephew's birthday party, and her family knew something was up when she didn't show up to that either. They all started looking for her and reported her missing on the 8th after failing to locate her. Then there was a discovery, and not a positive one. Worryingly, her car was found abandoned a mile away from her home. Then, when investigators took a closer look, they found a bloody handprint on the hood of the car. This triggered a huge response from police and local volunteers. Locals were looking everywhere for the missing girl. Tragically, on the 12th of June, Sarah's body was discovered. She was found in a wooded area, and an autopsy revealed the horrors she had gone through. She had been AR'd and stabbed over 40 times. Police knew they needed to speak to people who were at the party that night. They were trying to place who would be the potential suspects. Police discovered some disturbing tweets that Sarah had posted, apparently referring to her ex and his mum. The ex was called DJ Watters, and she wrote, "So you know I live on a dead end, I see you creeping," on the 1st of June. Then 2 days later she posted, "Getting threatened for days now, is that the new thing to do?" Investigators also got an anonymous tip that DJ had apparently left a threatening voicemail on Sarah's phone. It's also alleged that his mum rang her and threatened to kill her, and she was so scared by this that she'd reported it to police. Then police were examining phone records and found another suspect. 19-year-old Dante Taylor had been communicating with Sarah via phone. Police took a DNA sample from him and also a palm print to check against the palm print found on the hood of the car. It came back as a positive match, and Dante was arrested and charged with R-ing and murdering her. The prosecution stated at the trial that he had killed her out of anger when she rejected his advances. He was found guilty and sentenced to life. In 2017, he was allegedly attacked in prison by officers. He was found deceased in his jail cell from self-unaliving the same year. What these men did to this defenseless woman is absolutely disgusting. Please be warned that this case is incredibly upsetting. It was the 26th of January 2011 in New South Wales, Australia. Lynette Daly was a 33-year-old mother of 7. She was actually heading to a beach for a camping trip with her boyfriend Adrian Atwater. Along for the ride too was Adrian's friend Paul Maris. They decided to pitch a tent near 10 Mile Beach, which is a fairly isolated area. They figured it would be nice to drink and enjoy the sun in this secluded location. At some point during the trip, Adrian decided to violently R Lynette. It was later proven that she was so intoxicated from the day drinking that she would never have been able to consent. Then Paul also violently R'd Lynette, and she had severe internal and external injuries. For some reason, the pair then decided to bundle Lynette into the car and drive her closer to the water. They dunked her in the sea, and it's unclear as to why they did this, but some believe that they may have been trying to wash the blood off her. Horrifically, in the attack, she lost 2 litres of blood. Now, it wasn't until hours later that Paul decided to call an ambulance, but by that point she was already dead. An autopsy showed that her cause of death was blunt force G-tract trauma. She had bled out. When questioned by police, the men had decided to fabricate a story. Adrian told police that he hadn't realised Lynette was in that much pain. He also told them that she had gone for a swim and became unconscious in the water. Now, obviously, this may have been a reason that the men dunked her into the water to make their story seem more believable. He claimed that she had consented, but her blood alcohol level was actually found to be dangerously potent. Paul had burned the mattress that Lynette was assaulted on and the clothes that she was wearing. Adrian was charged with manslaughter and Paul was charged with being an accessory. The coroner stated that the story the men had told was inconceivable and dishonest. However, shockingly, the men were not initially prosecuted. The reason given was insufficient evidence. Lynette's children were left without a mother, and these 2 men walked completely free. Finally, in 2016, there was a review of the case. The pair were put on trial for aggravated assault. In 2017, a jury took just half an hour to find them both guilty. Adrian was found guilty of manslaughter and Paul was found guilty of hindering a police investigation for burning the evidence. Adrian got 19 years in prison and Paul got just 9 years. This mother vanished over Thanksgiving. The FBI were able to uncover shocking secrets that no one could have guessed. It was 2018 and Kelsey Bereth was a 29-year-old mother from Colorado. She had a 1-year-old daughter and she was living in Woodland Park. Now, she had a fiancé pictured called Patrick Frazee, but the pair didn't live together. Friends and family described Kelsey as a dedicated mother who would do anything for her child. It was the 22nd of November that year and the family were due to celebrate Thanksgiving. However, Kelsey was last seen on CCTV at a Safeway and was never seen alive again. The timeline is a little bit confusing, but later that day she reportedly met up with Patrick so he could pick up their daughter. Kelsey was apparently due to go back to her job on the 26th of November, but she never did. Her mum reported her missing on the 25th of November after not hearing from her for a while. Patrick reported to police that he had heard from Kelsey that day. Kelsey's boss told police that they had a text of her saying that she was taking some leave. Now, this is all quite odd as it was out of character for her to call off work at late notice and become uncontactable. Then investigators started looking at the obvious things like her phone records. They found that Kelsey's phone had actually pinged off a phone tower in Gooding, Idaho. Now, this was hundreds of miles away from her home, but Kelsey did actually have family in Idaho. There was still hope that she would be found. However, then her family contacted the relatives in Idaho that she had there and discovered she wasn't with any of them. It started to dawn on her loved ones that something might be seriously wrong. Kelsey's brother at this point decided to go round to Kelsey's house to try and piece together any information to try and help find her. He was really confused to find, though, that everything seemed normal. There was no signs that she'd planned to go anywhere, her cars were still at her house, and all of her belongings. Investigators also started wondering why Patrick hadn't reported her missing sooner. As her fiancé and the father of her child, he should have been in the most regular contact with her. Police then brought in the FBI to assist with the search, and months after she vanished, Patrick was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder and solicitation of first-degree murder. In 2019, police revealed something shocking. Patrick had a mistress named Crystal Kenny. It transpired that Patrick had beaten Kelsey to death after an argument. They were apparently in the middle of breaking up and arguing over child custody. After killing his wife, he then rang his mistress to come and help him clear up. Crystal was working as a nurse at the time and for some reason obliged and came round and helped him mop up the mess. She also helped him burn her body. She actually ended up admitting everything to the police and showing police where they burned the mother of one. Now, Patrick was sentenced to life without parole, but Crystal got just 3 years and is now a free woman.
This woman became so obsessed with true crime that she brutally murdered someone just out of curiosity. This story needs a massive trigger warning, as this photo is not what it seems. This is Young Yu Young, a 23-year-old woman described as a recluse who lived with her grandfather in South Korea. Young became so obsessed with true crime TV shows and books that she spent months plotting the murder of a stranger. She finally settled on a victim who was 26 years old and whose name has never been publicly released after contacting 54 other women on a tutoring app. She posed as a mother who was looking for someone to teach her daughter English, and she would message each tutor to see if they taught lessons alone and out of their own home. After contacting 54 other women, she finally found her victim, who did in fact live alone and agreed to help her daughter. So she set up a date in May of this year and arrived to the victim's home in Busan, posing as a young student dressed in a school uniform. And when the victim let her in, she proceeded to stab her over 100 times, most of which occurred after the victim was already dead. Young then went to the store to purchase garbage bags and bleach, and then she returned back to the home where she dismembered the victim. She even cut off her fingers in an attempt to delay identification. Young then stuffed the body parts into suitcases, changed into the victim's clothes, and was seen on CCTV going in and out of the victim's home multiple times with the bloodstained suitcase. She then called a taxi who took her to the Nakdong River, where she dumped some of the remains in a secluded park. In an attempt to make it look like the woman just disappeared, Young also kept her phone, ID, and wallet, and she thought she committed the perfect crime, but she was very wrong. On top of being caught on CCTV leaving the victim's home, Young was also acting very strange in the taxi drive to the river, and the driver even saw the bloodstained suitcase. So they were the one to actually call police and report what they saw, and upon investigating, police discovered a gruesome scene. Many of the woman's body parts were found at the park, but some were also found at Young's home. Authorities also found that her search history consisted of looking up how to kill someone for months leading up to the murder, and she even rented books from the library on how to get rid of a body. Young was soon arrested, but her story changed multiple times. She first told police that she only moved the woman's body after someone else killed her, and then she told them that she actually killed the tutor during an argument. But she ultimately told the police that she murdered the woman out of pure curiosity and just to see what it was like after becoming obsessed with true crime TV shows and books. Young was charged with murder, desecration, and abandonment of a corpse, and prosecutors were originally wanting the death penalty because of how gruesome the crime was. Young pleaded for a more lenient sentence because she said she suffered from hallucinations and other mental health disorders at the time of the murder, but the judge ultimately ruled the murder was very premeditated and carefully planned, and instead she was sentenced to life in prison. In addition to that, she's also ordered to wear a tracking device for 30 years after. This kind of confused me, but from what I can find, those sentenced to life in prison in South Korea become eligible for parole after just 20 years behind bars. So I guess it's a real possibility for Young to be released early.
This video might change your perspective on life.
Hit that water, 225 feet, 25 stories, 75 miles an hour. In 4 seconds, you hit that water. And the impact reverberated through my legs and shattered my T12, L1, and L2. They just popped and splintered inside me. I sat in my room on September 24th writing that note. Only 20% of people who die by suicide actually wrote a note. I wrote that note. Mom, I love you, but you're not always right. Dad, I love you, but stop, stop bringing the office home. This isn't work. I said to my little brother he wanted to be a DJ. He was making mixed cassette tapes. And I said to my brother he'd be a household name, you know. And my sister wanted to make films. I said, you got this, go get it, you know. I said to my best friend, Jay Lewis, you'll find another best friend. That's not how it works. And I put the note in my shoulder bag and the shoulder bag by the door. And at 6 in the morning, I entered my dad's room. And he wears a CPAP machine. He woke up and he goes, Kevin, what's wrong? He had known of my, unwell behavior, and he'd known I was diagnosed. He'd known I was on meds. I said, nothing, Dad. I just wanted to tell you that I love you. I wanted to tell him. But as I wanted to tell my dad the absolute truth that I was suicidal and that I was going to go to the Golden Gate Bridge and die, a voice in my head said, be quiet, Kevin. This is inevitable. And I listened. And it led me to take a bus to the Golden Gate, crying the entire time, begging myself to tell the one man who loved me the most in the world on the phone that I was sick. I needed help. But I couldn't. Because as I was wanting to tell someone of my pain, the voices were screaming in my head that I had to die. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to die. I believed I had to. What do you do when that happens? And you've never experienced it before. And you've no one to talk to about it, or you feel you have no one to talk to about it. Anyway, it led me to be on that rail. And this woman approaches me from my left, and she had blonde curly hair. She's beautiful, and she goes, "Vil, you take my picture?" And that's when I was like, nobody cares. I think today she was actually trying to reach me. She was the only person that engaged, that interacted, that tried to connect. I didn't see it. And the voices won that day. Where 2,000 people have died, I got to live. And I'm grateful for every millisecond I get to walk and breathe. Because I almost couldn't. I hit that water 225 feet, 25 stories, 75 miles an hour. In 4 seconds, you hit that water. And the impact reverberated through my legs and shattered my T12, L1, and L2. They just popped and splintered inside me. And I temporarily lost use of my legs. I went down 70 feet beneath the water surface, and I opened my eyes. And all I wanted to do was live. I swam 70 feet with one breath without the use of my legs as fast as I could. Thinking the entire time, if I die here, no one will ever know I didn't want to. And that's what drove me.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
There's a strange missing persons case happening right now out of Montana, and we should talk about it. This is Renee Arcand. She went missing during a 5-day camping trip near Glendive last June, and the details surrounding her disappearance are still a mystery. Renee was last seen on June 26th of this year at the Fish Intake Campground, which is a really popular paddle fishing site. At the time of her disappearance, she was traveling from Wisconsin, where she was from, to Oregon. And in that last week of June, she decided to stop and camp for a few days in Montana. In the days prior, Renee was working at the Buffalo Gap Guest Ranch in North Dakota, which is about an hour east of Glendive. There she was working with a man who has not yet been publicly identified, and the two decided to camp together at the Fish Intake Campground, which is along the Yellowstone River. According to the man, on the night of June 26th, he, Renee, and her 2 dogs camped out in her dark blue 2011 Toyota Scion. He states that he went to sleep that night in her car with her 2 dogs, and when he woke up the next morning, Renee was gone. Almost all of her personal belongings were left behind, including the car, obviously, and her 2 dogs. But one material item was missing along with Renee, and that was her iPad. According to the man, he then spent the next few days looking for Renee, and he officially reported her missing 3 days later on June 30th. The Dawson County Sheriff's Office immediately started looking for Renee, and they, along with volunteers and Badlands Search and Rescue, have since searched the Yellowstone River and 20 miles around the area where she went missing. Almost every inch of the campground and surrounding areas have been searched using boats, drones, cadaver dogs, helicopters, and even using sonar equipment. But absolutely no trace of Renee has been found, and it's like she vanished into thin air. The river was reportedly really high at the time and incredibly muddy and deep, and the current was estimated to be roughly 8 miles an hour. The sheriff has stated that it's really rare that someone goes missing in the Yellowstone River, but it does happen. Although they did state that they usually would have been found by now. No witnesses in the area saw Renee go into the river, although at this point, the police assume she did. It's important to note that on August 13th, just 2 months after Renee went missing, human remains were found in the area, but they have since been ruled out and do not belong to Renee. The man who Renee was camping with has reportedly been cooperating with law enforcement, and he did tell authorities his story of what took place. The DCSO has stated that so far the man's story does check out, and whatever reason he gave for having such a big time gap before reporting her missing makes sense. What's strange though is that one of Renee's beloved dogs, a Chihuahua mix named Bean, is also now missing in a separate but related incident. Apparently after Renee went missing, the man she was traveling with kept her dogs, Bean and Zizzy, but as he was driving back to North Dakota just a day after Renee was reported missing, he reportedly let Bean and Zizzy out to go to the bathroom, where they then both ran away. Zizzy was eventually found 15 miles outside of Glendive, but Bean is still missing. He was last seen near the Montana-North Dakota state line. The police still have Renee's car, and authorities have since tried to ping her iPad that is also still missing, but the location was turned off and it no longer has a connection. Workers at the campsite have confirmed that they did in fact see Renee at the campground the night she went missing, but it's now been 6 months, and Renee is still missing. So far, the police have said that this is not a criminal investigation, but the circumstances surrounding Renee's disappearance remain a mystery. Boaters, fishermen, and hunters in the area are asked to keep their eyes open for any clues. And if you were by chance camping at the Fish Intake Campground the week of June 26th, please try to remember if you might have seen Renee or her car. Renee is described as being 5'5", 150 pounds, and has brown hair and hazel eyes. She also has a tattoo on her wrist that says, "This too will pass." If you have any information at all, please contact the Dawson County Sheriff's Office at 406-377-5291.
This case is just absolutely heartbreaking. Trigger warning, some of the details are quite graphic. This is 15-year-old Sebastian Kalinowski. In 2020, he'd recently moved from Poland, where he lived with his father, to Huddersfield in West Yorkshire to live with his mother Agnieszka and her partner Andrzej. What this couple did to this young boy is just absolutely horrific. From the moment he went to live with them, he was forced to call Andrzej Sir and was subjected to regular humiliating drills, which consisted of push-ups, press-ups, squats, and he was also regularly injected with needles that Andrzej had used himself to inject steroids. Despite the horrific abuse at home, Sebastian was described by his teachers at school as a model student. He was polite, well-mannered, his English was improving, and he'd made lots of new friends. They had no idea that he was being abused at home. On August 13th, 2021, just 3 weeks into the summer holidays, and only 10 months after he'd moved to England, paramedics were called to Sebastian's home, and they found him unconscious. He'd actually been out cold for hours before help was called. It soon became quite obvious that Sebastian had fallen ill due to untreated injuries. He had multiple broken ribs, which had been left untreated and caused sepsis. Sadly, it was too late to save him, and he died the same day. An investigation into Sebastian's death began, and CCTV was recovered from the house. Sebastian had been forced to live an absolute nightmare in this house for months on end. The CCTV was thought to have been set up by Andrzej as a way of controlling Sebastian, and it uncovered months of abuse. He had suffered so much at the hands of his mother and stepfather. Videos showed numerous incidents where Sebastian had been punched, kicked and stamped on. In one video, he was seen being whipped with an electrical cable and being repeatedly stabbed with needles. And at one point, his mother had picked him up by the neck and thrown him to the floor. He was also beaten with a bed slat and a broken chair leg. On the day of Sebastian's death, Andrzej was seen forcing food and drink into Sebastian's mouth before stabbing him repeatedly with a needle in the thigh and groin. It was also clear in that video that Sebastian was incredibly weak and he was struggling for breath. Just hours later, he was dead.
The evidence against these two monsters was absolutely overwhelming, but despite that, they both pleaded not guilty to murder. Agnieszka pleaded guilty to child cruelty and Andrei pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Despite that, the jury found them both guilty after a 5-week trial at Leeds Crown Court, and they were both sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 39 years, plus 9 years for child cruelty. This case has literally shocked me to the core. The fact that this can happen while you're just laid asleep in bed is just absolutely horrifying. Trigger warning, some of the details are extremely graphic. Kimberly Cates and her 11-year-old daughter Jamie were fast asleep on the night of October 2nd, 2009. They were completely unaware that 4 teenagers had broken into their house with knives and machetes, intent on murder. 19-year-old Stephen Spader, a high school dropout, had formed a club with 3 friends called the Disciples of Destruction. He'd told his friends Christopher, William and Quinn that they had to be initiated into the club, and to do that they had to join him in entering someone's house and killing everybody inside. They chose the Cates home at random, completely unaware that David was actually away on a business trip and that Kimberly and Jamie were alone, asleep upstairs. They broke in through a small downstairs window and made their way upstairs with their machetes and knives. They found Kimberly and Jamie asleep in the bedroom and began their attack. Stephen and Christopher started raining down blows on both Kimberly and Jamie. Just a quick trigger warning again here because the next bit is pretty graphic. Kimberly was hit 32 times. Her skull was split open, her left eye socket destroyed, several organs were pierced, her bones were shattered, and her throat was slit. Despite her injuries, Kimberly shouted to her daughter, telling her everything was going to be okay, before finally succumbing to the massive blood loss and passing away. 11-year-old Jamie was struck 18 times. The blows severed part of her left foot, split her skull open, and shattered her jaw. Jamie actually played dead until the boys left, and then she struggled to the kitchen and dialed 911. Miraculously, she actually survived. The boys dumped their bloody clothes in a river after the attack and then went home to bed. But the next day, they went to a friend's house and started bragging about the attack. The friend's mum actually overheard part of the conversation and went to the police fearing that her son might be involved. All 4 teenage boys were soon arrested and their trials began. It was determined that Stephen top left and Christopher top right were the ones that had attacked Kimberly and Jamie. William, bottom right, had actually stood in the bedroom doorway and witnessed the attack, while Quinn Glover, bottom left, had waited in the living room. Stephen Spader showed absolutely no remorse over the killing of Kimberly. He did it for fun, and if it hadn't been Kimberly, it would have been someone else. He was sentenced to life without parole for the murder of Kimberly and 76 years for the attempted murder of Jamie. At Christopher Gribble's trial, he actually admitted that if he'd realised Jamie was still alive, he would have made sure she was dead. He also said that he was the one that slit Kimberly's throat. He was sentenced to life without parole. William Marks was sentenced to 30 to 60 years for being an accomplice to murder, and he'll be eligible for parole in 2039. Quinn Glover was sentenced to 20 to 40 years for burglary, robbery and conspiracy, and he'll be eligible for parole in 6 years' time. Jamie bravely appeared in court to see her attackers sentenced, accompanied by her father David. They now hold a golf tournament every year on the anniversary of Kimberly's death to raise money for the Kim Cates Scholarship Fund, which helps college students with their expenses.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington state and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison. This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know. This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Thelma Boinville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Thelma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Thelma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Thelma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Thelma's husband Kevin wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Hayley is currently awaiting trial. This little girl got revenge on her killer from beyond the grave. On the 25th of January 2005, Katie Coleman finished school and went back to her home in Indiana, United States. Katie was 10 years old and lived with her mum and dad and sister. At 3 p.m. that day, her mum asked her to go to the dollar store to get toilet roll. Now, Katie knew the area well and it wasn't really far to go. After getting the toilet roll from the shop, Katie stopped at the bank to get a lollipop for her way home. However, when Katie's dad returned home, the little girl still wasn't back. Her parents called police and a few days later an Amber Alert was issued. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen a girl who looked like Katie in a truck. The driver was described as a skinny white man about 6 feet tall with short dark hair and fair complexion. Tragically, 5 days after going missing, Katie's body was found. It was in a creek just a few miles from her home. Disturbingly, her hands and feet were tied and she had been SA'd. It was determined that her cause of death had been drowning. 20-year-old Charles Hickman rang the police to confess. He said he and another man had abducted Katie after she'd witnessed a substance deal. He said they tried to scare her into not saying anything and they tied her up, but she ended up falling in and drowning. Disgustingly, this turned out to be a false confession. This obviously wasted police time and caused massive amounts of distress to Katie's family. Police continued to look for evidence and they did find a cigarette butt near to Katie's body. They tested it for DNA and it matched a man called Anthony Stockelman. Police compared the DNA on the cigarette butt to the DNA on Katie's body and it was a match. Anthony, a father of 2 young boys, was in the area that day visiting his mother. He entered a guilty plea and was given life in prison without parole. But this is not the only punishment that Anthony would receive. Now, Anthony claims that he was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance during the crime. He said this is because his father had died 6 months prior. Regardless, Anthony was imprisoned. Unlucky for Anthony, he was actually housed in a prison with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris was serving a sentence for burglary and was in the same wing as Anthony. Jared forcibly tattooed the words "Katie's Revenge" across Anthony's forehead. He wanted to brand Anthony for life for killing his young cousin. Killer accidentally admitted to his crimes by accident when he forgot he was wearing a microphone while taking part in a documentary. This is how a true crime documentary exposed a killer. In 1971, Robert Durst met Kathleen McCormack and they got married. At the time of her disappearance in 1982, Kathleen had nearly graduated college. She was last seen by a witness at a dinner party where she appeared to be upset. She got a call from Robert and left. Robert admitted to having argued with Kathleen that night, but he said he put her on a train to New York and then never saw her again. Her friend called police to report her missing. Interestingly, Kathleen had been treated at a medical centre for facial bruises weeks prior to this and told the friend that Robert had done it. Robert had actually been dating someone else for some time prior to this and had been living separately to Kathleen. When her family broke into her cottage to try and find out where she was, they found the place had been trashed and her possessions put in the bin. Kathleen's family always believed that Robert was involved in her disappearance. In 2000, Susan Berman, a friend of Robert's, was found murdered. Now, she'd actually provided Robert with an alibi for Kathleen's disappearance. Now, pay really close attention to this next bit. Days after she was killed, a letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department contained Susan's address and the word cadaver on it. On the envelope, Beverly was misspelled. Robert admitted in 2005 that Susan had called him shortly before her death to say that the police wanted to question her about Kathleen going missing. It's believed that Robert killed Susan to keep her quiet. In 2001, Robert's neighbour's body parts were found floating in Galveston Bay. Robert's elderly neighbour, Morris Black, had been killed and Robert was arrested. He was actually released on bail and fled and was found about a month later in Pennsylvania. He was found with $37,000 cash, 2 weapons, and interestingly, Morris Black's driving licence. In court, Robert claimed he was acting in self-defence. He said he'd accidentally shot Morris and dismembered his body. Due to lack of forensics, he only got 5 years in jail. This is where things get really crazy. HBO was filming a documentary called The Jinx. During production, Susan's stepson found a letter written by Robert. This contained the same spelling error in the word Beverly as the anonymous letter to police. This implicated Robert in the murder. Now, while filming the documentary, Robert needed the toilet. He forgot that he had a microphone still attached to him. He was recorded talking to himself. He said, "There it is, you're caught. You're right, of course, but you can't imagine. Arrest him." And then he said, "What a disaster. He was right. I was wrong." And finally he said, "I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course."